Good evening and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. In his latest tweet storm, U.S. President Donald Trump attacks a group of, quote, progressive Democrat Congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt and inept anywhere in the world, end quote. Now, while President Trump did not take any specific names in this Twitter thread, he most likely was directing these comments towards Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan. Amongst other things, the president's comments were factually incorrect. All Congresswomen besides Ilhan Omar were born in the U.S. Ilhan Omar migrated to the U.S. in her early teenage years. This Twitter rant brings to light an already known reality. The President of the United States spews 12 lies a day and often makes up his own facts. Going beyond that, it also reinforces the fact that the President has a very clear idea of who is allowed to call themselves American. And anyone who challenges his idea of America is the enemy. It seems that making America great again also means forgetting the fact that America's history is witness to the fact that the most important fights the country has seen were fights to make the country more inclusive and pluralistic. On tonight's show, we discuss what is Trump's version of America and how much of a pushback is there to curb Trump's narrative. We welcome our guest to explore the topic in detail today. Joining us is Daniel Lippman, who is a journalist who reports for Politico and is the co-author of Politico's Playbook. He's joining us from Washington. We're also joined by Mr. Andrew Grossen, who's an analyst joining us from Dublin, Ireland. Thank you both for joining us. Now, Mr. Lippman, let me begin with you. Trump clearly thinks that there is a very strict criteria for who can constitute as being American. What do you think, in Trump's view, it means to be American?
I think in Trump's view, you have to be born in the U.S. without parents or grandparents who are immigrants, and also helps to be white because he and his supporters, they view America as, kind of racially divided, where they don't want as many people from immigrant countries making up the U.S. population. They're trying to curb migration from Central America, and especially when some of these minority women especially get power and are aggressively challenging Trump's policy and him as a person, that especially gets them going and makes him very mad.
Right, and you're saying it makes him very mad that there are minority people representing the United States and are in power. Given all of this, given all of the comments he's given in the past, do you think when he says that he wants to make America great again, as Nancy Pelosi stated, he just wants to make America white again?
I don't think it is as simplistic as that, because he has many other policies besides these immigration policies. He wants to make manufacturing alive back in the U.S. so that more people can get jobs. He has wanted to help the energy industry, get back to a point of strength, which he has helped do so, although the Obama administration played a big role in America making more natural gas and exploring oil across the country. But I think one specific component of his policies has the effect of trying to limit how many people are coming from other parts of the country that don't look like traditional Americans in his point of view.
Right. And Mr. Grossen, just talking about everything that Mr. Lippman stated, and let's go back to the time before Trump. What did it mean to be American, and what do you think has changed in the conceptualization of what it means to be American now?
One thing about America is that we've always been a country of immigrants, of migrating people. But over the last 10, 20 years, there's been an influx of non-European immigrants in America as well. We're tipping to the point where it can be, in the next 10 years, a minority-majority country. So this shifting demographic is becoming more and more obvious to the political actors in Washington. And I think that's why Trump and his base are capitalizing on this fear that the changing demographics and that America's looking more brown than white that it has been in the past.
Right. And following from that, I do want to show a clip of Trump giving a press conference in front of the White House and him defending his tweets when he attacked these minority women, minority congresswomen. Let's take a look at it.
As far as I'm concerned, if you hate our country, if you're not happy here, you can leave. And that's what I say all the time. That's what I said in a tweet, which I guess some people think is controversial. A lot of people love it, by the way. A lot of people love it. But if you're not happy in the U.S., if you're complaining all the time, very simply, you can leave. You can leave right now. You can leave. And that's what I say all the time. They can leave. And you know what? I'm sure that there'll be many people that won't miss them. But they have to love our country. They're Congress people. And I never used any names. But these are people, quiet.
So, Mr. Lippman, you got a chance to hear that with us. Now, there are two main pressing questions that arise from that. One of them, that is that he says a lot of people would agree with what he said, and that's not entirely false. I mean, these claims he makes, these tweets he gives out, there is a massive support for that. There is an audience for that. How is that polarizing the United States?
Yeah, there's a reason he's doing these tweets in the first place. That he's not totally irrational to make these types of provocative remarks. It's to inflame his base, to remind them that he's fighting for them against these people who they don't like. And so I think this is a proven strategy that has worked for him in the past, where, remember, the first day of his announcement for his campaign back in 2015 was calling Mexicans racist and murderers and drug dealers. And so that didn't stop him from winning the nomination and the presidency. And so he's kind of doubling down on this formula of dividing America in these types of lanes where he has his Americans who he thinks love the country, and then he views those congresswomen
right.
as hating America when there's no evidence that that's why they are saying what they're saying.
Right. And let's just delve deeper into that. These words that he says, they're not just words, are there? Because when a person in a power of position such as he is, when they say it, it causes a chain reaction. It probably has manifestations, dangerous sorts, in multiple scenarios. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair that a president of the United States is supposed to model behavior for the rest of the country, for fellow politicians and people around the world. And Trump falls short of that in some key ways where most Republicans aren't even defending him on this. Several Republican senators, Olympia Snowe from Maine, or no, I think it was Susan Collins from Maine, and Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, they criticized Trump yesterday. And we might see more Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, condemn these remarks because they've taken a life on their own. That's not just like a usual tweet that people are mad about.
Right. Right. And Mr. Grossen, a lot of Republicans surprisingly have come out condemning what Trump has said. But at the same time, the reaction isn't as would be expected in something like this. There aren't enough people coming out condemning what he said either. What do you think is happening here? And even when it comes to the Democrats taking a softer stance on Trump, what do you think they're banking on?
I think the Republicans, it really just shows that this is now Trump's Republican Party, that he has totally made it into kind of his nativist, white supremacist kind of ideology, and kind of reacting to what he was saying and defending it. Like, I'm an American who lives in a majority white country. And so like to hear him say, just leave, this is something that Black or brown Americans have heard all the time. And it's despicable that the Republican response has been so tepid. And it really shows whether they fear condemnation from Trump. Like, we saw his recent tweets about Paul Ryan in the past, or it shows that they actually are thinking that this could be a winning strategy, which is also very concerning. And as for the Democrats, you do see a harder push now. I think a lot more Democrats are going to be pushing for impeachment after the press conference that was held last night.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Andrew Grossen, for us and talking to us. Mr. Lippman, going to that thing that Democrats will have a harder push towards impeachment, what can we foresee? What is going to happen there?
Well, I don't think this is going to lead to impeachment, but this is just part of the evidence that Democrats have that Trump is not suited for office. We're going to see Robert Mueller, the former special counsel who did the big Russia investigation. He's going to testify in a week or so in Congress, and so that could have a galvanizing moment. But I think many Democrats view impeachment as a losing strategy, given that the majority of Americans don't support that, and they would further tear the country apart, and it would hurt Democratic chances in November 2020 in the re-election campaign for Trump, because Democrats have to seem moderate for them to win.
But do you think in this America there is space for people to be moderate anymore? I mean, it seems that the hate that is spewing from this side, from the Republicans, from Trump, leaves no room to be moderate. There needs to be a strong reaction to oppose it.
I think you can oppose Trump's rhetoric and policy without being far on the left. And so there are plenty of moderates who don't like what Trump is doing, and they aren't going to switch to becoming members of the left just because of what Trump is saying. That they don't agree with that thought that just because he acts one way, then I have to totally go on the other side as well. And so you can pick and choose what you disagree with Trump on, and still stay in the middle. And just the fact of America is that while the country has become more polarized, there are still millions of Americans who are moderate. And so this is the political reality that Democrats and Republicans have to face.
Right. And on that note, I'd like to introduce another guest who's just joined us, Ms. Linda Fledmann, who is the Washington Bureau Chief and White House correspondent at Christian Science Monitor and is the host of the Monitor Breakfast. Thank you so much for joining us. And she's joining us from Washington, D.C. Now, Ms. Fledmann, we've been talking a lot about what this means going forward for Trump, these tweets that he's put out. And one thing interesting that a guest earlier talked about was that it seems that the Republican Party is Trump's party now, something that you also wrote about earlier. Tell us about that idea.
So when Donald Trump first took office, there were Republicans who were vocally opposed to him, including members of Congress. And one by one, they have all fallen away. They have either lost election, they have resigned, they have retired. They've basically given up because Donald Trump has this base of support among the electorate. And those are the same voters, the same Republican voters who vote for members of the House and Senate. So even though some Trump supporters don't like his rhetoric, they like his policies. And on balance, they're willing to put up with the rhetoric and still support him.
Right. So there was a very interesting article in The Economist that I'd like to refer to, in which it stated that today's right is not an evolution of conservatism, but a repudiation of it. And an excerpt from it says, conservatives believe in character because politics is about judgment as well as reason. They are suspicious of charisma and personality cults. In America, plenty of Republicans who know better have fallen in with Mr. Trump, even though he has been credibly accused by 16 different women of sexual misconduct. Now, given with this, it seems that the spirit of conservatism has drastically changed and shifted. Is that something you would agree with?
I do agree. I mean, this is not the Republican Party either of my parents or even of just a few years ago. Donald Trump really, initially it was seen by some as a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. He has in terms of policy, has gone an extremely different direction than where the party used to be. That the party used to welcome immigration and came very close to coming up with a comprehensive reform of the system that everybody believes needs to be fixed. This is a party that used to believe in free trade and believed that tariffs were bad for the economy. Donald Trump has these core beliefs that immigration needs to be very limited. He's not against immigration, but he thinks that many types of immigrants are actually bad for the country and a drain on our system, which is provably false. But you can't, when Donald Trump believes something, you can't convince him otherwise. So old-style liberalism, which is a belief in freedom of movement and freedom of trade, that is gone from the mainstream American political thought and is now almost seen as a relic of the past, although I know there are people who still hope for a restoration of that line of thought, but for now it's gone.
Right. Mr. Lippman, is that analysis you would agree with as well?
Yeah, I think Linda is completely accurate on this, and that I would say that there are some Democrats who still believe in that, and they could become, one of them could become the nominee of the party next year, and so it hasn't completely left the mainstream of American political thought. It just has shifted. The Republican Party no longer believes in that type of stuff. But once Trump is gone, I could see that many Republicans would be criticizing what Trump stood for and want to rebuild the party in their own image, which would still have some nationalist elements, but not be as hardcore xenophobic as he is perceived to be.
Right. Now, I just want to switch up the discussion a little and go back to the original tweets that Trump gave. One thing was obvious, that he was attacking these women on the basis of their race. But also another thing that seemed to be there, which was also reiterated in the press conference he gave in front of the White House, was that if you don't agree with what America stands for, you can leave. There's nothing wrong with it. If you don't agree with us, you can leave. Now, it seems like it's not just he's not just attacking people of color or et cetera, immigrants, whatever you may want to call them, but he's also attacking dissent, that if you don't agree with the narrative that's being put out there, you should just stay quiet or you should leave. Ms. Fledmann, let's build on to that idea. Tell us more about it. Do you agree with it, that he's just cracking down on dissent?
This is classic authoritarian rhetoric, and it's really, every time we think we've heard it all from Donald Trump, he takes it to the next level, and he said it over and over again yesterday. I mean, he made his original tweets on Sunday, and it was shocking, and then the reactions were slowly rolling in on Monday as members of Congress were returning to the Capitol. Does he really believe this? I don't know. Is he a white nationalist? This is what the four women who spoke yesterday were suggesting, and one of them said it out loud, that he represents sort of the white nationalist movement. I think Donald Trump, first and foremost, just likes to, as we say, stick his hand in the hornet's nest. What's stunning about his latest tirade against these women who profoundly disagree with him is that the Democratic Party was in the middle of its own fight. You had these young women of color, freshman members of Congress, in an argument with Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, who's literally a generation or two older than them and is a bit more temperate in her rhetoric and in her approach to politics. She doesn't want to impeach Donald Trump right away. She really thinks that time is not right politically to do this, whereas this group of young congresswomen wants to go there now, or at least some of them do. So,
do you think this united the Democrats then?
United the Democrats, at least for now. I mean, the rule in politics is when your opposition is killing itself to stand back and watch. But Donald Trump likes to be the center of attention. And I think what he's trying to do is make these four women who are known as the Squad, make them appear to be the leaders of the party. And not Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is a very shrewd politician. She's been around a long time. She's probably the most talented politician in Washington. These four young women are new to Congress and new to Washington, and they're learning their way, and they're making some mistakes, but they also have a tremendous following, and they do represent a slice of the future of the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump wants to run against them next year when he's running for re-election, not against Nancy Pelosi.
Right. Mr. Lippman, hearing all of that, do you think that this thing that he wanted to be the center of attention, but a lot of when they clapped back, the Congresswomen, and they responded to the attacks, they also said that Trump is using this as a distraction. Unpack that for us. What is he using this as a distraction for?
So oftentimes there are more important things policy-wise that are happening in the country, and at the time when he makes these types of tweets. And so you can look at the part of what was happening in many American cities with raids on immigration, illegal immigrants from the ICE, from DHS. Those raids did not go well. They only captured a handful of people. But of course, he didn't want to talk about that. And so I think he was just watching television on Saturday and saw the intra-Democratic Party feud between the Squad and Nancy Pelosi, and he just wanted to jump right in on Nancy Pelosi's side, but in a way that she didn't want any part of it. And this is only going to make the Democratic cause stronger against Trump.
Right. And that is a very interesting analysis there, that he just wanted to jump in, get a slice of the pie, get some attention, and detract people from what was happening there. Now, when we're talking about these raids that he said that weren't, as you said as well, they only captured a couple of people. Now, Trump goes on and says that they were very, very successful. Is there any evidence of that?
There's no evidence that they were very, very successful. Given that ICE agents, if they knock on your door, they can't, and you don't open, they can't barge right through unless they have a court warrant to specifically enter someone's property. And so a lot of undocumented immigrants have gotten wise to this technique, and they just don't open the door, or they go to their friend's house somewhere else or another city where there's less likely going to be an ICE raid against them specifically. And so that's just, because they announce these raids way ahead of time, a couple times, that's you lose the element of surprise, and so you can't really have successful raids.
Right. Now, Ms. Fledmann, talking about Trump's popularity, we know that outside of America, poll ratings show that his popularity has fallen, has taken a dip. But when we talk about within America, do you think in order to continuously have this momentum of making America great again, inflaming his voter base, his actions and his words will just continuously get worse and worse?
I don't know what the future holds, but Trump's popularity is an interesting phenomenon. He's recently been actually near his all-time high among the American public. But still below 50%. But among Republicans, it's quite high. He's I think, above 90% support among people who identify as Republican. But the reason is not because of his outrageous rhetoric. It's because of the economy, first and foremost, and other policies that people support from him. Honestly, with such a strong economy, his job approval rating should be well over 60%. So he's really hurting himself. I think if Donald Trump were to dial back the rhetoric, he wouldn't lose his base, and he could gain people in the middle. Now, after his performance of the past couple of days, I don't know. I think he crossed a certain boundary that he hadn't.
What was that boundary? What was that boundary that he hasn't crossed before? I mean, he demanded for President Obama to show his birth certificate. He called Mexicans murderers and rapists. What was this boundary this time that he crossed?
It was telling four duly elected members of Congress who are American citizens to, quote, go back to where they came from, and then identifying them or suggesting that they're from foreign countries. Now, one of them was born in a foreign country. She's an American. She's a refugee. She's an immigrant. She's in many ways an incredible success story. His insulting of these four women of color was just such a blatant example of racism that it was breathtaking when he said that.
Right.
And he almost can't help himself. He gets these ideas that this is a great time to jump in and really stir things up, and there's just no stopping him. And he never apologizes.
Right. On that note, I'd like to thank Mr. Daniel Lippman for joining us from Washington and Linda Fledmann for joining us from Washington as well. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to talk about the ongoing migration crisis brewing in the United States. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. Now, officials from President Trump's government state that they want to fix a broken asylum system. Human rights activists say that the policies the government is imposing are a grave threat to human rights. Let's find out more about the ongoing migration crisis at the southern U.S. border and the raids being carried out within the U.S. to round up undocumented migrants to send them back to their countries. We welcome to this show Ms. Janet Crawford joining us from San Francisco. We're also joined by Mr. Adrian Pereira, who's the director of North-South Initiative. He's joining us from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Thank you both for joining us. Now, Mr. Pereira, we're hearing a lot about the stories coming out of the United States about how refugees, asylum seekers are being kept and how they're being held. Now, the Republicans are stating that the asylum system was broken. Take us through it. What do you gather from the information coming out of here? Do you think the system was broken enough to warrant the treatment of these migrants this way?
Definitely not. You see, at the global level, the reform on both migration and refugees had taken place a few months ago. And unfortunately, United States pulled out from the system. So the global community actually has proposed very clear and concrete solutions. So I think this is totally untrue that the system is broken. It can be improved, but to warrant the raids at this scale, it's shocking. Globally, all of us are shocked. And sadly, it's setting a precedence for many other countries, including Malaysia, to follow in those footsteps. So it's very disturbing, and we need to stop it immediately.
And that's a very interesting point you're making that it's setting a dangerous precedent for other countries to follow suit. Why do you think that is the case? Why would countries look to the United States and then follow suit?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to global border controls, since 9/11, America has kind of set the trend. And with the rise of right-wing politics globally, we have seen the anti-migrant sentiments being put on the table. And I don't think many have the skills or knowledge to handle it. But hopefully people power and community organizing can be a force to counter this madness.
Right. And let's talk to Ms. Crawford about what is happening in the United States. Now, Ms. Crawford, hearing the news there, whatever rhetoric is being spewed, whatever images are being shown, it's a very polarized picture. Now, migrants and limiting their access to the United States was a promise that President Trump made before becoming president, and it seems that he's trying to follow on that. Now, how do you think dehumanization is taking place in the United States against migrants and against asylum seekers?
Well, I think it's very clear that dehumanization is happening because we're not treating all immigrants equally. The immigrants that we are seeing portrayed in this way and that we are treating this way come from specific backgrounds. And I think it's also important to note that ICE raids are not something that's new. That deportations are not something new. A very high number of deportations happened under President Obama, but they happened in a very different way. And we didn't see people being placed into detention camps, being deprived of basic human needs such as toothbrushes and soap and the ability to take showers and that sort of thing. And the public display of this kind of treatment is something that's very polarizing in the United States and very distressing. And I think goes beyond just the treatment of refugees themselves. It goes to sending a message out to certain communities in the United States about their rights and whether or not they're going to be protected by the government. And I think that that's one of the larger issues that we're looking at here.
Right. And something that I do want to talk about is how this treatment or how the situation of asylum seekers when they leave their war-torn or conflicted communities and try to aspire towards a community that's more stable, but then they end up in detention camps, what that has on their psyche and their psychology, that impact.
Yeah, I think that there's a very lasting damage that happens here because we're inflicting basically trauma on these communities, and in particular trauma on very, very young individuals, where that's been shown to have a lifelong effect on the development and the ability to thrive of people when they have early childhood experiences, such as what we're seeing in these camps. And I also think that that also extends to the mental health and the stress outcomes that we see in the immigrant communities. Those people who are documented or who are citizens that are seeing people from their homelands treated this way, possibly family members, possibly people that they know,
right.
And that signal's being sent to them as well.
And Mr. Pereira, same question to you here. When we're talking about the laws within the United States that have all these stringent regulations regarding childcare, regarding child protection, but then they're treating children like this. Now, what are the laws, international laws governing children's care, and what happens when they are put in detention facilities? Does the government in charge become responsible for them?
Yeah. No children should be put in detention centers. The impact we have seen on their mental health and even their physical health is very chronic, and there should be community response or community solutions to hosting children. So according to human rights standards, it's definitely a violation of international norms, and I don't think Trump or his administration is afraid of lawsuits. They will have their own ways to maneuver. But we, as a global community, we have to put pressure because this is going to set the precedents. And just last week in Malaysia, we came across young children of migrants who were in detention, and we managed to get them off safely. But I don't think there is access to justice. I don't think there's access to the trauma and healing processes. So all of this will one day backfire, and we need to be ready to handle it when it backfires. Yeah.
Right. And Ms. Crawford, with all the news coming out of these detention centers, there was a very, very harsh criticism of Donald Trump's government and policies. Do you think people are seeing what's happening here and they're becoming more and more aware that these policies not at all benefit the community at large?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, because I think what we have today in the United States is a very highly polarized public. And the news media is also highly polarized. So the information that people on one side get versus the information on the other is vastly different. So I know that people who come from my political background are very aware of what's happening in these camps. They're very politically active about it in opposition. But I think there's a large cohort in the United States who sees immigration as an enormous issue, a negative issue for the United States, who see entrance into the United States across the borders as illegal activity, which it is not. But the media that those people are being exposed to and the viewpoints is vastly different from the media that I and my community are being exposed to. So I think that there's an extreme divide in the narrative that people are listening to in this country.
Right. And while you're talking about narrative building and polarization, you being a member of society also understands how this impacts psychology. What do you see happening in the future with all these various factors, with, as you mentioned, media, social media, everything happening? Do you think that the polarization will just grow to become more and more deepened?
I do see this becoming an issue that I would say that the issue of polarization is not going away, and that the mastery of narrative is something that at least the right in the United States has become very good at, and it's something where understanding how to build a narrative of inclusion and a narrative of connection is going to become increasingly important if we want to solve some of these issues.
Right.
But I don't see that happening right now.
Right. Mr. Pereira, you earlier mentioned that there is a responsibility on the global community as well when we see something like this happening. What do you think the global community is doing right now to pressurize the most powerful country in the world?
Yeah, I think we have some dialogues with different embassies to voice our concern. And the response that I have received from some of the diplomats is that since some cities may not have to respond according to what Trump and his administration says, they are able to take their own autonomous decisions, and even some are going forward to protect the migrants and refugees under such harsh attacks. So I think there's some flickers of hope, which the whole world can follow up. Yeah.
Right. On that note, I'd like to thank Mr. Adrian Pereira for joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you so much, Ms. Janet Crawford, for joining us from San Francisco. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.